I'll never forget the day I went to pick out a pumpkin for Halloween. It was supposed to be a simple, regular trip. You know, the kind where you grab a pumpkin, carve it up, and let it sit on the porch with a flickering candle inside. But things didn't go as planned. It was late October, a few days before Halloween. The air was chilly, the kind of cold that sneaks through your clothes and clings to your skin. But the thing I remember most was the fog. Thick, heavy fog that blanketed everything. Driving through it felt like moving through a dream. The trees lining the road were just dark shapes looming in the mist, and the headlights of my truck barely cut through the haze. I had to squint just to stay on the road. I was heading to Old Thompson's Pumpkin Patch, a farm just outside of town. A buddy of mine had recommended it and said they had the best pumpkins. Old Man Thompson runs it, he had said. Bit of an odd guy, but it's worth it for the pumpkins. I didn't care much about the old man. I just wanted a good pumpkin, something big enough to carve a decent jack-o'-lantern. The fog made the drive feel longer than it should have been, and by the time I pulled into the gravel lot in front of the farm, the sun was starting to set behind the fog, casting everything in a dull gray light. The place was eerily quiet. No other cars, no sounds, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I stepped out of my truck and looked around. The field stretched out in front of me, rows and rows of pumpkins, barely visible through the fog. I could only see a few feet in any direction. Beyond that, everything faded into the mist, like the world just ended at the edge of the farm. There was a small shack near the entrance, an old wooden structure that looked like it hadn't seen any repairs in years. A crooked sign hung from the roof, pumpkins for sale, and sitting next to it in a rickety chair was the old man. He didn't move as I approached, just sat there, slouched with his head low, and his wide-brimmed hat hiding most of his face. His clothes were worn and tattered, his coat hanging loose on his thin frame. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his hands resting on his lap looked like gnarled branches. "Excuse me," I said, stopping a few feet away from him. My voice felt strange in the stillness, like it didn't quite belong there. "I'm here to get a pumpkin." He didn't respond at first, didn't even lift his head. I started to feel a little uneasy, standing there in the fog with this strange old man. I cleared my throat, trying again. "Do I just pick one from the field?" Slowly, the old man lifted his head. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunk in deep into their sockets. He stared at me for a moment, his dark eyes seeming to look straight through me. But I told myself it was just the cold. "They're in the back," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "The back," I repeated, glancing at the field. The pumpkins were right there, scattered across the ground, but the fog made it hard to see far. He nodded, then slowly stood up from the chair, using a walking stick for support. He pointed past the field toward the far end, where I could just make out the shape of an old beat-up truck parked in the mist. The fog swirled around it, making it seem like it was floating on the edge of the world. I didn't want to follow him, but something about his stare made me feel like I didn't have much of a choice. I nodded and followed as he began to shuffle toward the truck. His footsteps were slow, dragging through the gravel as the fog thickened around us. The further we walked, the more distant everything felt. The road, the shack. Everything seemed to disappear behind us, swallowed by the fog. When we reached the truck, the old man stopped and gestured toward the back. It was an old, rusted thing. the kind you'd expect to see abandoned in a junkyard. The bed of the truck was filled with pumpkins, but they weren't like the ones in the field. These pumpkins were darker, almost black. Their shapes warped and twisted like they had grown wrong. I frowned. I didn't like the look of them, but I figured it was just the fog playing tricks on my eyes. "Which one can I take?" I asked, glancing at the old man. He didn't answer. He had moved behind the truck, out of sight. I waited, expecting him to come back around and help me pick one out, but he didn't. The seconds ticked by, and the only sound was the faint rustling of the wind through the trees. I called out, "Hey, sir," but there was no reply. I took a step closer, peering around the side of the truck. "Hello?" I called again, louder. This time, nothing. I felt a strange twinge of panic rising in my chest. He couldn't have just disappeared. There was nowhere to go. The fog was too thick, and the field was wide open. I walked to the back of the truck, expecting to find him crouched down or something, but he wasn't there. He was gone. The spot where he had been standing was empty, just fog swirling in the air. I looked around, my heart racing. Now there was no way he could have walked off without me hearing him. I should have been able to see him through the fog, at least a shadow or a shape moving away, but there was nothing. A heavy feeling settled in my chest. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. The air felt colder, the fog pressing in around me, thicker than before. I didn't want to be there anymore. I didn't want one of those pumpkins. I didn't even want to know what had just happened. I turned and hurried back toward my truck, my boots crunching on the gravel faster. Now, I didn't look back. I didn't want to. All I could think about was getting out of there, getting away from that fog, that field, and that strange, vanishing old man. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. As I pulled onto the main road, the fog seemed to lift a little, but the uneasy feeling in my chest stayed with me. I never went back to that farm. Every time I pass it, even from a distance, I feel that same chill creep up my spine. I don't know what I saw that day or where the old man went, but something wasn't right about that place. I want to tell you a story that still haunts me, even though it happened almost a year ago. It's the kind of thing you never expect to happen to you, especially when you're just trying to take a break from life for a while. My girlfriend Katie and I rented a cabin from Airbnb last October, thinking we'd enjoy a quiet, peaceful weekend in the woods. But what we found there was something we could have never prepared for. It was late afternoon when we arrived. The drive had been long, winding through forests that were just beginning to show the vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows of autumn. The cabin was exactly what we had hoped for: small, cozy, and isolated. It was tucked away off a gravel road, far from any nearby houses or towns. The air smelled of pine and damp leaves, the kind of scent that makes you feel like you're truly away from the chaos of everyday life. When we pulled up, everything seemed normal. The cabin looked clean and well kept, with a wrap-around porch and a small pile of firewood stacked neatly by the door. We unloaded our bags, feeling excited about the weekend ahead. The inside was rustic, with a wood-burning stove, cozy couches, and a few old books left on a shelf by previous renters. It seemed perfect. Too perfect, maybe. After settling in, we decided to explore the cabin. Katie wanted to start by lighting a fire, so I began poking around, looking for matches, and maybe a hatchet to chop some kindling. That's when I noticed a small door tucked away behind the kitchen. It was low, almost hidden, and I wouldn't have even seen it if I hadn't been looking for tools. "Hey, what do you think's down here?" I called Katie. She came over and looked at the door, a curious expression on her face. "Maybe storage. I don't know. It's kind of weird, but I guess cabins have cellars, right?" I shrugged and tried the knob, but it was locked. That struck me as odd. Why would a basement or cellar be locked in a rental? Still, I didn't think too much of it at the time. Katie and I decided to forget about it and enjoy the evening instead. We spent the rest of the day relaxing. We cooked a simple dinner and played cards by the fire, and by the time night fell, we were both feeling pretty good about our decision to come out here. The peacefulness of the woods, the crackling fire. It was the perfect escape. But things took a turn later that night. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound. It was faint, but unmistakable, the sound of knocking. At first I thought it was coming from outside, like maybe a branch tapping against the window, or an animal rustling around in the woods. But as I lay there listening, I realized it was coming from inside the house, and more than that, it was coming from beneath us. The knocking was coming from the basement. Katie was still fast asleep, but I could feel my heart start to race. The knocking continued, slow and steady, like someone was trapped down there trying to get out. I shook Katie awake, and when she heard the noise too, she was just as freaked out as I was. "What do we do?" she whispered. I didn't have a good answer. The smart thing to do would have been to leave, to get in the car, and drive as far away from the cabin as we could, but something stopped me. Curiosity. Maybe I had to know what or who was making that noise. I grabbed the flashlight we'd brought with us and headed for the small door behind the kitchen. Katie followed close behind, her eyes wide with fear. When I reached the door, the knocking stopped, as if whoever or whatever was down there knew we were coming. I hesitated for a second before pulling out my multi-tool and working at the lock. It took a few tries, but eventually I heard the click of the latch giving way. Slowly, I opened the door, revealing a narrow set of wooden stairs leading down into darkness. The air that wafted up from the basement was damp and musty, like it hadn't been opened in a long time. I shone the flashlight down the stairs, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, at the bottom of the stairs, was a man. He looked gaunt and exhausted, with dirty clothes and wild eyes. He was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, staring up at me as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Please help me," he rasped, his voice weak and cracked from what must have been days, weeks of dehydration. I was too stunned to speak. Katie gasped, gripping my arm tightly. "What? What are you doing down here?" I finally managed to ask. The man explained in broken sentences. He had rented the cabin a month ago, but he had gotten into some kind of dispute with the owner. He couldn't pay the full amount, and instead of dealing with it in a normal way, the owner had locked him in the basement. He had been stuck down there ever since, surviving on what little food and water had been left for him. I didn't know whether to believe him or not. The whole situation was so surreal, like something out of a horror movie. But looking at the man at his desperate, hollow eyes, I knew he wasn't lying. No one could fake that kind of terror. We called the police immediately. When they arrived, they took the man to safety and arrested the cabin owner. I didn't get to see him, but the police told us later that he was a normal-looking guy, someone who didn't fit the profile of a monster. But looks can be deceiving. and that man had kept another human being locked away in his basement for weeks. We never got all the details. The police handled the investigation, and Katie and I left the cabin the next morning. We didn't want to stay another night. Not after what we'd found to this day. I still think about that man. How close we came to just ignoring the knocking. How we might have left, and no one would have ever known he was down there. Back when I was in middle school, I joined the school basketball team. I wasn't any good at basketball, but I signed up to keep busy after school. I wanted something to fill my time, even though I knew deep down that basketball wasn't for me. The other kids knew it too. They teased me all the time about how I could never make a basket, but I stuck with it, hoping things would get better, though they never did one afternoon after a long 2-hour practice. We all headed to the locker room to change. School ended at 3:30, and we practiced until 6. It was a routine by now, a tiring one. I hadn't brought my phone that day, which made me nervous. I knew my mom was picking me up later, and I hoped she'd brought my phone with her. Not having it felt strange, like I was cut off from the world. But I wasn't thinking too much about it at the time. I was changing out of my sweaty clothes when I noticed 3 guys from the team walking toward me. They were the usual ones who teased me during practice, always ready with some comment about my poor performance. As they approached, I braced myself. Sure enough, they started mocking me, saying I was the worst player on the team and that I couldn't make a basket to save my life. I tried to shrug it off, giving a fake laugh and saying, "Whatever," but they weren't done. One of them said something under his breath, and before I knew it, they grabbed me. At first I thought they were just messing around, but then it hit me. They were going to put me in my locker. I had seen them do things like this before to other kids, but I never imagined they'd go this far with me. I asked them what they were doing, trying to keep my voice steady, but they didn't answer. They just told me to shut up and drag me toward the lockers. I fought back, trying to wriggle free, but they were stronger. Before I knew it, they shoved me into my locker, slamming the door shut. I thought that would be it, that they'd leave it unlocked, and I could push it open once they got bored. But I was wrong. I heard the clink of the lock being put in place. They had locked me in. I panicked. I pounded on the door, shouting for them to let me out, but they just laughed and walked away, their footsteps echoing as they left the locker room. Silence followed. I was trapped, locked in a small, dark space with no way out. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I was completely alone. Minutes passed, then an hour. I kept yelling, hoping someone would hear me, but no one came. I tried not to think about the fact that I had no phone. If I had brought it, I could have called for help. Instead, I was stuck in this tiny space, my only hope being that someone would eventually find me. The air in the locker felt heavy. I sat down, curling up in the cramped space. My knees pressed against my chest. Time seemed to slow down, and the silence around me became deafening. I was starting to lose hope when, finally, I heard something, the faint sound of a door creaking open. I perked up, banging on the locker door again, yelling for help. Footsteps approached, and then a voice called out, asking what I was doing in there. Relief washed over me. Someone had finally come through the tiny slits in the locker door. I saw a man in a janitor's uniform. He wasn't pleased. He muttered something under his breath, shaking his head at the situation. I told him what had happened, that some guys had locked me in here after practice. He seemed annoyed but not surprised. The janitor said he didn't have the key to the lock, so he'd have to grab some tool to cut it off. He left for what felt like an eternity, though it was only a few minutes. The locker room felt colder now, as if the air had seeped out with him. But then he came back, holding a small angle grinder. After some loud scraping sounds, the lock finally came off, and the door swung open. I stumbled out, my legs stiff from sitting cramped up for so long. I thanked the janitor, my voice shaky. He didn't say much, just told me to be careful next time, and walked off, probably tired of dealing with students like me. I didn't waste any time getting out of there. I ran down the hall to the school lobby, my heart still racing. When I got there, I saw my mom pacing back and forth, worry written all over her face. She rushed over when she saw me, asking where I had been. I told her everything about the boys in the locker. She was angry and relieved at the same time, hugging me tightly as I told her the story. That night, we talked for a long time. We decided that I would quit the basketball team. There was no point in staying, not when things had gone this far. I didn't want to be around those bullies anymore. It wasn't worth it. I didn't care about basketball that much, and I knew there were better things I could do with my time. The next day, I found out the 3 boys who had locked me in had been suspended for 2 weeks. It felt strange knowing they were being punished. I had expected more, maybe even expulsion, but at least they were gone for a while. I didn't have to see their faces again, and that was enough for me. In the end, I found other after-school clubs to join. I made real friends, ones who didn't mock me or push me into lockers. I never played basketball again after that. It just wasn't worth it. Now, whenever I see a basketball game on TV, I think back to that day, to the sound of the lock clicking into place, and I'm reminded that sometimes walking away is the best decision you can make. My husband works nights at the local diner. He leaves before the sun sets, and I don't see him until the next morning when he's tired and quiet. It's a lonely routine, especially out here in the countryside, where the nearest neighbor is a long walk away. But we've been managing. It's peaceful most nights, just me, the trees, and the wind outside. Last night was different. It was around 2 a.m., and I was already in bed trying to fall asleep. The sound of the old house creaking was normal, so I wasn't bothered by that. But then there was a knock. It came from downstairs near the front door. It was soft at first, like someone tapping gently. My first thought was that maybe my husband came back early. It was rare, but sometimes he would get off early if the diner was slow. The knock wasn't urgent, just enough to catch my attention. I threw the blanket off, feeling the cool air hit my skin as I got out of bed. The house felt colder than usual, but I didn't think much of it. I hurried down the stairs, my feet moving quicker, with the thought of seeing him home early. When I reached the door, I hesitated for a second. The knock had stopped, and everything was quiet. I opened the door just enough to peek out, but there was nothing. No one. Just the front yard, bathed in pale moonlight, the trees in the distance swaying gently in the night breeze. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting, listening. I thought maybe he had gone around to the back door, but I didn't hear any footsteps. The stillness was unsettling. Finally, I closed the door, locking it. I turned off the light in the hall, making my way back to bed. Just as I was about to settle back under the covers, it happened again. Another knock, but this time it was louder, more deliberate. My heart started beating faster. I got up again, this time moving slower. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I walked toward the door. When I opened it, a child was standing on the porch. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old. He was small, with messy hair and wide, confused eyes. He looked up at me like he was lost. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice soft but strange, almost like he wasn't fully awake. I was taken aback. Where did this kid come from? There weren't any children nearby. Not for miles. I glanced around, expecting to see someone, maybe his parents, but there was no one, just him, standing there alone. I felt uneasy, but I couldn't leave a child out there in the middle of the night. I knelt, trying to get more information. Before I could ask, something shifted in the shadows behind him. A man stepped out from the darkness. I didn't see him at first because he blended in so well with the night. He was tall, his face partially hidden, but I saw the glint of something in his hand, a knife. The realization hit me like a wave. He wasn't there to help the child. He was using him as bait. The man took a step forward, and I slammed the door shut, locking it as quickly as my hands would let me. I pressed my back against the door, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to catch my breath. I heard the man outside pacing, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Then the knocking started again. Not at the door this time, at the window. I turned my head toward the sound, the soft tap of metal against glass. He was trying to get in, testing the windows, moving from one to the next, each knock sending a spike of fear through me. I didn't know what he was capable of, or how far he would go. My phone was upstairs, and every second I spent frozen in place felt like a lifetime. The sound of the knocking was relentless, moving around the house, first one window, then another. It felt like a game to him. I forced myself to move, sprinting up the stairs, my legs shaky as I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. My voice trembled as I told them what was happening. They said they'd send someone right away, but out here in the countryside, I knew it would take time. The knocking grew louder, more aggressive. I stayed upstairs listening, praying that the windows would hold. I didn't know if the man was alone or if more people were waiting outside after what felt like an eternity. I saw the flashing lights of a police car pull up in front of the house. The knocking stopped. Everything went silent again. When I looked out the window, the man was gone. There was no sign of the child, no one lurking in the yard. The police searched the area, shining their flashlights into the trees, but they didn't find anyone. They told me it was probably just someone passing through, maybe trying to scare me, but I knew it was more than that. The way the man moved, the way he used the child, it felt planned, deliberate. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the couch, staring at the door, waiting for the sun to rise, my mind racing with thoughts of what could have happened if I had hesitated for just a second longer. Back in the mid-1970s, when I was about 12 years old, my friends and I spent almost every weekend at a playground in Flushing, Queens. It was a typical hangout spot for us, not because of the swings or slides, but for the basketball court and pickleball games. My group of friends, Sean, Jay, Jabber, Apu, and Tino, were all a bit too old for the playground equipment, but we loved the space to run around. Most days were the same, routine and predictable, but one Saturday stands out more vividly than the rest. That day, Sean and I weren't in the mood for pickleball. The others were already deep into their game, but I had a different idea in mind. I was always the troublemaker, dragging Sean into things he normally wouldn't do. As we wandered away from the pickleball court, I looked toward the highway nearby. It was close enough that we could see the cars whizzing by, the blur of colors flashing in front of us like a challenge. I turned to Sean with a mischievous grin and asked, "You want to throw rocks at cars on the freeway?" His eyes lit up, matching my excitement. He didn't even hesitate, chuckling and agreeing. Without a second thought, we started searching for rocks, picking out smooth, round ones that fit perfectly in our hands. We lined up along the sidewalk, the cars speeding past just below us. It felt thrilling, like we were breaking some invisible rule just by standing there. The first few rocks sailed harmlessly into the air, missing the cars completely. We were almost ready to give up, laughing at how bad our aim was. But then, with one final throw, a rock hit a black Subaru with a sharp. The sound startled us, cutting through the noise of the highway like a knife. For a split second, everything froze. Then panic set in. We took off running, our feet pounding against the pavement as fast as we could go. Sean was quicker than me. He always had been. I was heavier, struggling to keep up, but fear kept me moving. My mind raced faster than my legs. What if the driver saw us? What if he followed? The thought of being caught was unbearable. We ran back toward the playground, where our friends were still playing pickleball, completely unaware of the trouble we had just stirred up. I was out of breath by the time we reached them, gasping for air as I stumbled onto the court. Sean was already there, looking a lot calmer than I felt. Trying to hide my fear, I shouted to our friends, telling them to switch places with us in the game. Without thinking, Jay and Apu stepped off the court, letting Sean and me take over. We had barely started playing when something made us stop. A man appeared, walking toward us with a purpose. In his hand, he carried a crowbar. My heart sank. This was the driver of the Subaru, no doubt about it. He wasn't shouting, but the look on his face said everything. His eyes swept over us, and I knew he was looking for the ones responsible. He asked where the kids who threw the rocks went, his voice filled with anger. My friends had no idea what he was talking about, and Jabbar asked him what he meant. I could feel Sean beside me, tense and quiet. I stayed calm, playing along with the act. When the man repeated that someone had hit his car with a rock, I pointed to my left, away from where we had come. "They went that way," I said, keeping my voice steady. The man nodded, muttering something as he jogged off in the direction I pointed. As soon as he was out of sight, the weight of what we had done hit me. Jay turned to me and Sean, suspicion in his eyes. He asked what had happened, and I confessed, telling him we had thrown rocks just for fun, not thinking about the consequences. Jay shook his head, disappointed but not surprised. He knew me well enough to expect this kind of behavior. "Whatever," he muttered, clearly unimpressed. "Let's just keep playing." The others followed his lead, and we went back to our game, trying to forget the tension that had just filled the air. For the rest of the day, we didn't see the man again, but something had changed. The adrenaline that had fueled my reckless behavior was gone, replaced by a heavy feeling of guilt. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting him to return, even though I knew he wouldn't. Every time a car passed by the park, my stomach twisted, thinking it might be him coming back for revenge. But the hours dragged on, and eventually we all went home, the incident fading into the background like a bad dream. Now, decades later, I look back on that day with a mix of embarrassment and relief. Embarrassment for how reckless and stupid I had been, and relief that nothing worse had happened. That man with the crowbar could have easily caught us if things had gone differently. Who knows what he would have done? I often think about how lucky we were that day. I'm in my 50s now, with a wife and kids of my own. My children have never caused the kind of trouble I did back then. I've made sure of that. I taught them to respect other people and think before they act, something I wish I had understood when I was their age. It's strange how moments like that stick with you. A split-second decision to throw a rock at a car could have changed everything. It's a reminder, even all these years later, that one small action can spiral into something much bigger, something dangerous. And sometimes you don't get as lucky as we did. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, a few years ago, when I was a sophomore at Hofstra University in Long Island, New York, I had just finished my degree in sports media, and my time at the school had been great overall. There were ups and downs, like there are for everyone, but one night was far worse than anything I had ever expected. It was Halloween, my favorite time of the year. The day felt cool and crisp, with leaves swirling around campus. That night, I had no plans. It was a Sunday, so most people were either at home or just hanging out. I thought maybe I'd find something to do, though. And as I left my dorm to get brunch, I noticed a poster pinned to the bulletin board in the hallway. It was for a frat party at Alpha Epsilon Pi, which I hadn't heard of before. This struck me as odd, since I was familiar with most of the fraternities on campus. The thought crossed my mind that something about it didn't seem quite right. Still, I figured I wasn't doing anything that night, so why not? It'd be a good way to pass the time. When nighttime came, I got dressed in a quick costume and made my way over to the frat house. The streets were dark and nearly empty as I walked, a slight wind rattling the trees. When I reached the house, it was quiet on the outside, but looked lively from within. I opened the front door, letting the sounds of loud music and laughter wash over me. Inside, a guy introduced himself to me as Alex Suozzi. He was wearing a shirt with the fraternity's name on it, so I figured he was part of it. I'd heard rumors about him around campus, though. People said he was a creep, someone who should be avoided. I nodded at him and kept moving, hoping he wouldn't follow. He started talking to me, but I ignored most of what he said, pretending to be interested in other things. There was something off about him, though. He seemed to watch me closely, almost too closely. People had mentioned before that Alex was a cousin of Thomas Suozzi, the U.S. representative for New York's 3rd Congressional District. I didn't care much for that detail, but I guess it explained why he seemed so full of himself. Eventually, I found the drinks and poured myself one. I wasn't planning on staying too long, but after about 15 minutes, I felt strange. The room seemed to spin, and I felt way more drunk than I should have. I'd had drinks before, but nothing had hit me like this. It felt wrong. I knew I had to leave, so I stumbled out of the party, weaving through the house, and finally making it back to my dorm room. Once there, I managed to kick off my shoes and crawl under the covers, the spinning in my head growing worse. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. That drink. It had been spiked. As I lay in bed, everything felt surreal, and I couldn't shake the thought that I had made a mistake by going to that party. I shouldn't have trusted a frat I'd never heard of. But at that moment, all I could do was close my eyes and try to sleep. I don't know how long I had been asleep, but at some point I woke up to the sound of drawers being opened and closed. My room was dark and my head felt heavy. At first, I thought I was dreaming, or maybe just confused from being so drunk, but the noise was real. I could hear my belongings being moved around. Slowly, I turned my head, and as my eyes adjusted, I saw a figure standing by my bed. It was Alex. He was in my dorm room, standing right next to me, rummaging through my things. My mind struggled to process it. Why was he there? How did he get in? My door had been unlocked, of course. I had been too out of it to remember to lock it. He must have followed me back from the party. I could barely form a clear thought, still feeling the effects of whatever had been in that drink. But I knew I had to act. I forced myself out of bed, unsteady on my feet, and tried to push him out. My hands shoved at him, but my strength was weak. He just stood there, staring at me like he didn't care at all about being caught. Somehow I managed to force him toward the door. My body was sluggish, but I didn't stop pushing. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I finally got him out of the room. I shut the door, locked it this time, and collapsed back into bed. The room was spinning again, and my limbs felt like lead, but at least he was gone. I had no idea what he had been planning to do, and I didn't want to think about it. The next morning, I woke up feeling terrible, not just from whatever had been in that drink, but from the fear that had gripped me the night before. I emailed my professors, telling them I wasn't well enough to come to class. There was no way I could function properly after what had happened. I realized how stupid I had been to go to a party for a fraternity I had never heard of. The whole situation had felt strange from the start, and I should have trusted my gut. Even worse, I hadn't reported Alex or the frat to anyone. Part of me knew it wouldn't have made a difference. Fraternities had their power, especially with Alex being connected to someone in politics. Nothing would have changed. That night haunted me for a long time. After that, I never went to another college party. Now on Halloween, I just stay home and hand out candy to trick-or-treaters. It's safer that way, at least in my own space. I don't have to worry about someone following me back to my room. It was the mid-2000s, back when I was a junior in high school. I remember that year vividly because my school's hockey team won the state championship. I was part of the team, and we were thrilled with our victory. Our captain, Dexter, was on top of the world that night. Dexter was one of the wealthiest kids in our school, and his family had a massive house. So to celebrate, he threw a huge party right after the game. Pretty much the entire school showed up. It was the kind of party you'd imagine in a movie. Loud music, tons of people, and a never-ending supply of drinks. I don't even remember how many beers I drank that night. I know that, as the night went on, I was getting more and more wasted. The party was a blur of laughter, music, and people shouting over each other. It started around 9 p.m., and by the time it ended, it was already 2 a.m. Time slipped away so quickly. When the party finally died down, I decided to head home with 3 of my closest friends on the hockey team: Thomas, William, and Jack. We piled into William's car with him behind the wheel. Jack took the passenger seat, while Thomas and I sat in the back. I was sitting right behind Jack, and Thomas was behind William. None of us should have been driving that night, but we didn't think much of it. We were young, drunk, and reckless. The car felt unsteady almost from the start. William was swerving left and right, and I could feel the car lurching around as if he wasn't really in control. We were only about 5 minutes into the drive when things started to get worse. I remember looking out of the window, trying to focus, when suddenly the car seemed to lift off the ground. It felt like we were flying, but it wasn't some fun, weightless sensation. My heart dropped, and I realized what was happening. We were driving off a cliff. The panic hit me like a wave. All of us were screaming, but the sound was swallowed up by the car's tumble. The impact came hard and fast. The car smashed into the ground, and everything went dark for a split second. The first thing I noticed when I came to was the pain in my left leg. It was overwhelming, unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I had broken my leg once before, but this was far worse. I could barely move. I heard Thomas groaning beside me, telling me he couldn't feel his legs. His voice was filled with fear, and I realized that he might be paralyzed. The worst part was the silence from the front seats. We called out to William and Jack, but they didn't respond. There was no sound, no movement. My gut twisted with a horrible realization that they were dead. Through the haze of pain, I fumbled for my phone. It was a miracle it still worked, even though the screen was cracked. With shaking hands, I dialed 911 and managed to tell them what had happened and where we were. They assured me help was on the way, but it felt like forever. When the paramedics finally arrived, they pulled us out of the wreckage. I don't remember much of the ride to the hospital. The pain in my leg was unbearable, and I drifted in and out of consciousness. At some point, I must have passed out completely. I woke up the next morning in a hospital bed. My whole family was there, crowded around me, their faces red from crying. They looked so relieved that I had survived, but something felt wrong. A nurse came in, and I could tell just by the look on her face that she wasn't bringing good news. She explained in a quiet, sad voice that they had to amputate my left leg. The damage was too severe, and it couldn't be saved. Eventually, I would get a prosthetic, but at that moment, I couldn't think about anything except the fact that my leg was gone. As if that wasn't enough, the nurse also told me that Thomas would never walk again. The paralysis was permanent, and then she said the words I had been dreading. William and Jack hadn't survived the crash. The news hit me like a punch to the chest. 2 of my best friends were gone just like that. I felt like I couldn't breathe. On top of everything, my hockey career was over. No more skating, no more chasing dreams of going pro. It all ended in one night. In the months that followed, Thomas and I leaned on each other to get through the pain. We both knew we were lucky to be alive, even though the losses weighed heavily on us. We also realized we needed to make a change. The drinking had cost us too much already. So we quit cold turkey. Eventually, we started attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and before long, we were helping run them. Now we spend our time trying to convince others to stop before it's too late. It's not an easy ride, but at least we're still here, still fighting. I still think about that night sometimes, about how different things could have been if we had made smarter choices. But the past is something I can't change. All I can do now is keep moving forward one step at a time, even if it's with a bionic leg. I know it's October, but I'm going to tell you about something that happened in the summer of 2018. It's been on my mind ever since, and honestly, I still miss the carefree feeling of summer despite everything. This happened at a sleepaway camp in the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts. I had been going to this camp every summer since I was 9 years old, and by the time 2018 rolled around, it was my second to last year. I was about to start high school, and this camp felt like my second home. I knew almost everyone there because it was a mid-sized camp, not too big, not too small. And over the years, I had made close friendships. But that summer, I met someone who left me with deep scars, the kind that never fully healed. His name was Ben. He was new to the camp, and I could tell right away because I'd never seen him before. We met on the first day, and I remember thinking he was incredibly attractive. He had this charm about him, and it seemed like he was into me too. We spent most of the day together, talking about our lives. At first, Ben seemed harmless. He came across as sweet, funny, and easy to trust. And at that age, I was still pretty naive, quick to believe in the goodness of others without hesitation. Within a couple of days, we became a couple. It felt so exciting. My first real relationship. We laughed together, and for those first few days, I felt happier than I ever had before. My friends teased me, saying I was abandoning them for a guy. They were joking, but part of me felt a little guilty for spending all my time with Ben. For the next 4 days, it was just Ben and me. We were inseparable. But on the 5th night, everything changed. It was around 9:30 p.m. after our usual evening activities. I went back to my cabin, took a shower, brushed my teeth, and slipped into my pajamas. By 10:30, the lights were out, and everyone else in the cabin had already fallen asleep. I've always had trouble sleeping, though, so I just lay in bed, waiting for sleep to come. About 30 minutes passed, and I started to drift off, the quiet of the night settling over the camp. That's when I heard the door to the cabin creak open. I wasn't alarmed at first. I figured it was just one of the counselors checking on us, or maybe one of the other campers coming back from the bathroom. But then I felt something strange, a slow tug on my blanket. The sensation was so light at first that I thought I was imagining it, but then it happened again, more deliberately. My blanket slid down my body, and I felt a hand touching me. A wave of fear washed over me as I realized what was happening. Someone was trying to pull my pants down. My body froze, and for a moment I couldn't move or scream. My heart was pounding so loudly that I thought it might wake the others, but then instinct kicked in. I grabbed the flashlight I always kept by my bed and switched it on. The light cut through the darkness, and there, standing right in front of me, was Ben. The sight of him standing there, caught in the act, was like a punch to the gut. Without thinking, I screamed, the sound tearing through the cabin. Ben bolted for the door, disappearing into the night. My scream woke everyone else up. The lights came on, and my cabin mate stared at me, confused and groggy, not understanding what had just happened. One of the counselors rushed over to me, asking what was wrong. I was shaking so badly I could barely get the words out, but I told her everything that Ben had snuck into our cabin and tried to undress me while I was half asleep. The counselor wrapped me in a hug, whispering that everything was going to be okay, but I could barely hear her over the adrenaline pumping in my ears. She said she was going to report it to the camp director right away and left to do just that. As soon as she was gone, the reality of what had almost happened hit me, and I felt sick to my stomach. I knew at that moment that I couldn't be around Ben anymore. I didn't care what the camp decided. I would stay as far away from him as possible. The next morning, after breakfast, the camp director called me and my counselor to his office. I remember feeling anxious the whole way there, wondering what was going to happen. When we got to the office, the director was sitting behind his desk looking serious. He told me that Ben had been placed on the do not return list, meaning he was permanently banned from the camp. He had been kicked out that very morning. I couldn't hold back the tears. It wasn't just relief. It was an overwhelming sense of gratitude that I was safe and that someone had believed me. I thanked the director, and after that, the rest of my time at camp passed without any more issues. But the memory of that night stayed with me. Now, as an adult, I still haven't fully healed from that experience. It left me with trust issues I carry to this day. I even began to identify as asexual afterward, as the thought of being with someone in that way filled me with dread. I haven't heard anything about Ben since then, and honestly, I don't care. What matters is that I'm moving forward, even if it's slow. If there's one thing I want the others to take away from this, it's that trust is something that should be earned, not given freely. Be careful. Get to know people first and protect yourself. I learned that the hard way. It was a cold, rainy night, and I was on my last pizza delivery shift. The rain had started early in the evening, drumming against my car's windshield as I drove through the quiet streets. I was tired and just wanted to finish up so I could go home. But there was one last order to deliver. The address was a bit out of the way, a house on the edge of town, the kind of place that people didn't usually go to unless they had a reason. I didn't think much about it at first, just another job to get done. I followed the directions on my phone, driving further away from the familiar streets. The houses became fewer and farther apart, the trees thicker and darker as I moved away from the city lights. The rain picked up, making it hard to see. I turned on my high beams to cut through the sheets of water, and that's when I saw the house. It was old, really old, the kind of house that looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The paint was peeling off the walls. The windows were dark, and the front yard was overgrown with weeds, but the house matched the address on my delivery app. This had to be the place. I pulled up slowly, parking the car right outside the gate. I grabbed the pizza from the passenger seat, hoping to get this over with quickly. I stepped out into the rain, pulling my hood up as I hurried toward the front door. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain was cold and heavy on my skin. I could feel the mud squish beneath my shoes. As I walked up the cracked stone path, there was no doorbell, so I knocked. The sound echoed through the house, louder than it should have been. I stood there waiting, but no one came. I knocked again, harder this time, my fist echoing in the empty air. I was about to leave when the door creaked open just a little. No one stood there, though. "Hello," I called out, stepping closer to the door. It swung open wider, as if inviting me inside. A gust of cold air rushed out. Carrying the smell of damp wood and dust, the hallway beyond was dark, barely lit by the glow of my car's headlights shining through the rain. I hesitated. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't just leave the pizza without delivering it. Maybe someone was inside, waiting. I stepped through the door, calling out again, "Pizza delivery." My voice echoed in the space. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. The walls were cracked, and the floor creaked under my feet. Dust floated in the air with every step I took. I could hear the rain pounding on the roof, but everything inside was eerily still. No signs of life, no sounds of movement. I looked around, trying to find a table or counter to leave the pizza on, but there was nothing, just a long hallway that led deeper into the house. The air felt colder, like the temperature had dropped the moment I crossed the threshold. My breath puffed out in front of me in little white clouds. I thought about turning back, leaving the pizza at the door and getting out of there. But something made me stay. I can't explain it. It was like I was being pulled forward, deeper into the house. I started walking down the hallway, my footsteps sounding too loud in the silence. The floor creaked under my weight, the wood groaning as if it hadn't been walked on in years. Every instinct in me screamed to turn around, but I kept going. At the end of the hallway, there was a door. It was slightly open, just like the front door had been. I reached out to push it wider, and as soon as I touched it, a cold breeze blew through the house, making the lights flicker. My hand froze on the door, and for a second I thought I heard something. A whisper, a faint voice. But when I strained to listen, there was only silence. I pushed the door open, and inside was a small room, empty except for an old chair in the corner. There was nothing else. No furniture, no people. Just that chair facing the corner, like someone had been sitting there, staring at the wall for years. The air was thick with dust, and I felt like I was being watched. I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. But just as I turned to go, I heard it again, the whisper. But this time, it was clearer. It was coming from behind me, from the chair. I slowly turned around, and that's when I saw it, a figure barely visible, sitting in the chair. Its outline was faint, like a shadow that didn't belong to anything. It didn't move, but I could feel its eyes on me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak. The figure started to rise from the chair slowly. The air around it grew colder, and I could feel the pressure building in my chest, like the house itself was pushing me out. That's when I ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted down the hallway, nearly tripping over my own feet. I burst through the front door, slamming it behind me, and jumped into my car. The rain was coming down harder now, pounding against the roof as I speed away from the house. In 2016, I worked at a post office. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid the bills. Most days were pretty routine, answering phones, sorting mail, and dealing with customers. Eventually, I found a better job, but my time at the post office left me with one experience I'll never forget. It was a strange phone call that still lingers in my mind. It was a quiet afternoon right after lunch. The office was peaceful, with only the hum of machines and the occasional ringing of phones. I was sitting at my desk going through some paperwork. When the phone rang, I picked it up as usual and greeted the caller with the company name and my own. On the other end, a man's voice greeted me. "Hi there. Would you sign my petition?" His voice was casual, almost friendly, but it was an odd request. Who calls a post office asking about a petition? I didn't even have time to process his question before his tone changed abruptly. "Sign my petition now," he demanded, his voice growing sharp. I was caught off guard by how quickly the conversation had taken a turn before I could even respond. He continued, "Just sign the petition." His voice was full of impatience and frustration. I finally managed to ask, "What petition are you talking about?" But he ignored my question and repeated the same demand, more forceful. This time, I could feel my patience wearing thin. This was some kind of prank or a joke, and I wasn't in the mood for it. My frustration got the better of me, and I snapped, "Stop messing with me!" I shouted into the phone. Looking back, I still don't know why I reacted so strongly, but at that moment I couldn't help it. The line went quiet for a second, and then the man's voice came back, colder and more menacing than before. "Sign the petition, or I'll follow you home and hurt your dog." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I don't even have a dog, but the threat felt personal and disturbing. My heart pounded in my chest. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He chuckled on the other end. "Billy Joe Bob," he said, his tone mocking like it was some kind of joke. "Where are you?" "Let's talk face to face," I challenged, hoping to get some kind of answer out of him. But he kept dodging the question, refusing to give any real information. Instead, he started to play the victim. "Here I am, just exercising my rights, and you people freak out over it." His words made no sense, and the way he twisted the conversation only fueled my frustration. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "If you're going to make threats, you better be serious about it," I warned him, my anger bubbling to the surface. He muttered something about me being unreasonable, calling me names that didn't even fit the situation. I could only laugh at how ridiculous he sounded, and then, out of nowhere, he switched his tone again. "Can't we all just get along?" he asked, as if nothing had happened. I wasn't having it. "If you want to meet, just say where," I told him, still trying to push him to reveal his location. I even gave him my address, but he kept avoiding the topic, refusing to answer. His frustration boiled over. "You're the one being difficult," he shouted before launching into another round of insults. I didn't flinch. At this point, I was too irritated to care about what he said. I decided to push back harder. "I'm not afraid of you," I said firmly. But the conversation had already gone in circles too many times. Suddenly, he shifted the tone again, trying to sound clever or intimidating. "You thought today was just another day, but guess what? Surprise." And then I heard it, a gunshot, loud and clear over the phone. My heart stopped for a moment. Was this guy serious? Was this happening? I sat there in stunned silence for a few seconds, unsure of how to react. But something inside me snapped, and I found myself laughing, almost in disbelief. "I'm not going anywhere today," I said, shaking my head. And with that, I hung up the phone. The office was unusually quiet after I hung up. The usual background noise of computers and printers seemed distant, as if the world had paused for a brief moment. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this call was off. Who was this guy? What did he want? Was it just some twisted prank? Or was there something darker lurking behind his words? I never found out. The man never called back, and as the days passed, I tried to put the incident behind me, But now and then, when I think back on that day, I can't help but wonder what might have happened if I had stayed on the line a little longer, or if I had tried to find out more about him. The memory of that phone call still sends a chill down my spine, and I'll never forget the strange, unsettling feeling it left me with. Sometimes, it's the things we don't fully understand that linger the longest. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.